Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Real Estate Show on KCMX News Media 880 and on YouTube at realestateshoworegon.com. I'm Pete Belcastro. This lady here is Alice Lema. We're both real estate brokers with John L. Scott in Southern Oregon. We get together with you once a week here on KCMX and on YouTube to talk about real estate issues facing all of us, and they're varied and amazing as they are. First person over here is Danee Fry. She's our guest today. She's an appraiser. We talk about appraisers. We need appraisers, don't we?
We love our appraisers.
Sometimes I hear we love the appraisal, and other times, that darn appraiser, that appraiser, bad. Danee, welcome to our show today.
Thank you.
You've been doing this a long time.
Do I have to admit how many years?
Yes, because we admit that, so yes, so do you.
All right.
Well, I'd love
40
to hear
years.
40.
40.
Yeah, how
40
did you
years.
get started?
I got drafted when I was working on another job for a city in another state. And we had some grant programs going that needed appraising, and they sent me to school to do that so that we could save some money on that and put it more into the grant programs.
We're always trying to save money around, aren't we, as we go at that. So you've been doing that a long time.
I have.
Has appraising, has it changed? Or is it really still the same when you started, the way everything else has changed? Appraisals maybe haven't.
The appraisals themselves haven't really changed that much. We still have 3 approaches to value, and most of the concepts and the theories that we work with have been around for a number of years. What's mostly changed is the technology of how we do things, how we present that to our clients, how we manage the data information, and how we store things. Those kinds of things have, of course, changed as
everything has, yeah.
But the basics, principles, and the ideas are pretty much the solid basic stuff that I started out with a few years ago.
What are the three parts of value? Do you know what that is? Do you know what they are? I'm trying to think of.
The 3 approaches you mean?
The 3 approaches to value.
It would be the sales approach, the cost approach, and the income approach.
I remember those from the exams.
You see, that's our favorite number is 3.
Okay,
because we can do that without taking our shoes off.
Yeah. And of the 3, when you do a residential an appraisal, right? Yeah, because if you have a loan, you're gonna need an appraisal.
Mm-hmm.
Which generally is used, or do all 3 of those approaches be used in reaching that value?
They may be used in some assignments. For the majority of the assignments, the primary approach is going to be the sales comparison approach.
The sales approach, okay.
And as a matter of fact, even Fannie Mae, which is, I think everybody knows Fannie Mae is the largest secondary market for loan packaging. They say that they expect to see the appraisals be based primarily on the sales approach. You can use other approaches as support, but if it's not based on the sales approach primarily, they're concerned that there isn't a market for the product, and so they won't take it.
And when they say sales comparison, there's that's what we call comps. I mean, the slang in the business
Other
is
properties that have sold.
comparables, right. So if you have a building and your neighbor sold for X amount, then you are likely to be affected by that value.
Probably.
And for how long do those values? How long do those last? We have so many questions. Sorry.
Well, the reason the question is how long do you go back? Because so many sellers and especially sellers, what am I going to compare in my neighborhood? So it's really important. So how far should we go back? I mean, are you going to go back and look on comparable sales?
Oh, I'm going to look at an appropriate time period for the kind of property I'm looking at. And those are, as you mentioned, are very diverse types of possibilities. So if I'm in a subdivision where there are quite a few homes and they're all very similar to one another, I'm probably going to go back 3 to 6 months if I can. I may have to go back a year. A year is kind of a guideline that if you have to go back more than a year for a lot of things, then we may have some other issues that we need to look at. But then if you have a very unique property, or where there are very few other properties marketed, then you may need to go back further and explain that. Because if you only have 2 or 3 sell a year and you need 3 or 4 to support your estimate, you can't make them up.
You can't make it.
So
have you ever
That's
been,
right.
have you ever been stumped where you couldn't come up with a value on something?
eventually we'll come up with a value.
Eventually
if,
you will.
If the sales approach is not always the best approach, we can make a case for the cost approach perhaps, or the income approach if it's something that is likely to be rented. And especially in single-family homes, you typically have the biggest sales market pool
Sure.
to look at.
That's what because that's
That's the
what we
majority.
build here.
But-
That's
what
the
in-
majority of our sales.
But in multifamily properties, 2 to 4 family properties, which are fairly common in the community, you don't always have a good pool of properties that have sold because people are buying those for a different reason than the people who are buying single family homes. The single family person is typically someone who wants to live there and raise a family and do whatever, and they want to own their own house and hang their pictures where they want to, not necessarily where the landlord says so. But with the 2 to 4 families, you move into that area where that's an investment property, and so there's a different attitude about it, and so maybe the income approach is
would be
particularly
smarter
helpful.
to use on those because we're going to see, as you know, the rules have been changed regarding additional dwelling units on properties. I mean, everything from
In Oregon.
Remember, if you live in Grants Pass or Medford and buy a single family lot that is zoned single family residential, you can build 1, 2, 3, or 4 units on it, right?
Or take the house down and reintroduce that many
Or
units.
take the house
yeah.
down and
we're
do it that way.
essentially thinking of it in our head, and love to hear your opinion on this, Danee, is that we don't necessarily have the single family zoning anymore. We're kind of trying to think of it more as multifamily zoning available when the population allows for it, because there's rules about how many people have to live in a town before you can do that, and also the setbacks and each individual's rules about a certain zip code.
Yeah, I would encourage people not to just do it as a mathematical problem of, okay, it's this size lot and therefore I could put a second unit or a third unit on it, because there are setbacks and there are a lot of other requirements that go into getting a building permit that a lot of people don't think about. So I would, of course, I'm an former city planner. I was a planner when I got into the appraisal part. That was what I was doing.
Interesting.
And so I'm always suggesting that you might want to talk to the planning
The planning
department
department is very
before
and
you
not
start
make it just a
digging.
math problem.
Yeah,
okay.
it's not
before you
just
spend the
numbers.
money. I think that's called also due diligence. That's another good word, 2 words to use regarding that goes. Well, appraising is. Are you busy right now? I mean, the market, as we talk about this, we're looking at it in, my goodness, both counties. We're seeing, pending sales are up from a year ago. There's a lot of activity going on. Is the
There
same
is.
way in the appraising?
I think every appraiser that I know is very busy. And don't forget, we're not just doing the sales contracts. We're also doing refinances. People want to add on or buy a boat. We're doing estates, and we're doing domestic relations types of things, and a variety of assignments besides just sales.
Yeah, see, I just think of appraisers. Yeah, you're just doing, lenders are calling you up into your pools, and you're going and doing homes. But as you said, you listed, look how many things you listed there.
Yeah, because there's
estates,
family,
there's
family,
deaths
probate,
and divorces that
estate.
change. You got to have value, don't you, for courts?
A lot of these things require appraisals. If
Life
Yeah.
changes.
Yeah, and so the appraisers are not just waiting on the sale contract to come through for us, but we have a lot of other areas that we're involved in as well.
Well, and then the interest rates changed several times recently. So did you, what kind of a reaction did you experience in your business with those interest rate drops?
That helps somewhat as people, as you said, more people can move into the buyer pool, and so they're going to do that. A lot of those people are going to be doing special financing programs through FHA or VA perhaps, which have an additional layer of rules for us to follow. But it's been busy. It's been busy around.
We do a lot of, Alice especially, talks about having a pre-home inspection done, for for sellers to know what you've got, what you're
And
up
for
against,
the buyers too.
and for the buyers.
Yeah.
What about? Do you see many or someone do an appraisal,
That's a
private
great question.
appraisal before a sale? Is that done often? Do you think?
I'm starting to see a number of those kinds of calls.
Really?
In what
Yes.
circumstance?
They're thinking about listing the property, perhaps, but they're not sure how they want to do things or what to think about.
But is there a court proceeding involved, or
Not necessarily. I'm getting calls from private individuals
really?
who are interested in marketing. They haven't made their decision of whether they're going to market it or not.
So they're taking that step to say to you as an appraiser, I'd like to have the value known when I go into this thing, first of all, to see whether I want to sell it, right? Whether I can sell it at that price, and should I sell it, right? I mean, it seems to be. But that's good that people are doing that. I'm glad to hear that.
That is.
Because they're taking more, sellers that are taking more steps for their own sake at being ahead of the game.
And not just picking numbers out of the sky.
And just saying, I think it's worth $500,000 because this, or $500,000 or $1 million, whatever. That gives you some real data, right? Some real good data there of what that potential is going to be.
And then how long can they use those for? Can they go up to a year?
The sellers can use the information as long as they want. I always caution the people that I deal with that, the market changes, and so this isn't something that's cast in stone forever and ever. It could change tomorrow, depending on an interest rate or something happens, some other thing that happens in the market. There aren't any ironclad. You can only use this. Technically, it's good for today and today only. And not only that, but it's good for this moment that I'm handing it to you.
Right, a moment in time.
But I'd want to have that too if I'm selling. I want that information.
Well, that's
Don't you
interesting
think? I mean,
because we've seen people do it when they have domestic situations, estate situations, and they really need that neutral third party to kind of weigh in on what ballpark the price is going to be in. But it's exciting, but it's a little bit unusual that regular individuals are getting their appraisers early. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, I've received a number of calls for that.
That's a nice trend. I'm happy to hear that.
I'm happy to hear that too. It's good. Well, we're with Danee Fry today here on the Real Estate Show, and Danee is also an instructor at the Rogue Valley Association of Realtors and does classes on appraising. So we always say what she teaches realtors we need to tell everybody about because it's such an important element in the sale is the appraisal. I mean, if the appraisal comes in wrong, and we got a break coming up here and ask you about that, what do you do when the appraisal comes in wrong? Can you change it or
well, it doesn't come in wrong. It comes in at what it is. It comes in, you may or may not like it, but it's not
That's
wrong.
Right. That's right.
Touche. Absolutely. It comes in what it is and not what I want it to be.
That's right.
So
there
true.
is a difference.
There is a big difference. And that, of course, today's program is sponsored by the Rogue Valley Association of Realtors as well.
Sorry.
RogueValleyRealtors.org. I love them all. It's a great thing. Talking about appraising. We got a break coming up here. Pete and Alice, we're coming right back to KCMX and YouTube at realestateshoworegon.com after this. Welcome back to the Real Estate Show on KCMX News Media 880. Pete Belcastro and Alice Lema with you today, and thanks for joining us. Next week here on the show, by the way, Alice, we're talking about appraising today with Danee Fry with us on a program presented by the Rogue Valley Association of Realtors. Next week, Guy Giles will be here. We're going to talk about interest rates that kind of crept up a little bit this week. Just a little bit, not much. And Sheriff Nate Sickler will be with him, too. So we're going to...
it's going to be a great interview.
Update about the cannabis world and about his...
Just sheriffing in general.
The sheriff world.
Sheriffing in
And I've learned
Southern
that
Oregon.
The sheriff, what happens with the sheriff really affects real estate a lot.
I think it does, yeah. I have people that actually call to see how long it takes.
Sheriff patrols.
For calls, yeah.
People ask that question.
It's part of their due diligence.
You still get repercussions in Josephine County. People still don't think they have coverage there, which is not true. They passed a levy. They have more of that. Anyway, that'll all be next week. Today, we're talking with Danee Fry. And Danee is also like a past president of the Appraisers, the statewide association. So you got to know what you're doing. I'll tell you that. So that's
actually it's a licensing board.
A licensing board. Okay. Everybody has to have a license.
Yeah. And how hard is it to become an appraiser?
I don't know that it's hard. It's a lengthier process than a lot of people think about. It could be anywhere from a year to 3 years to even longer, depending on how busy your supervisor is.
You have to have an apprenticeship.
We do have an apprenticeship program. The realtors take, I believe you take, about 150 hours. You take your exam, and then you get your field experience kind of as you go.
As you go.
Under your broker supervision.
And with appraisers, we go through an education process and an experience process, working under the supervision of an experienced appraiser. And then we take the license, and if we're lucky enough to pass, then we get to go out and
That's interesting.
And sign and go forward on our own if we want to, or stay with our supervisor, whatever we want to do.
I remember the last appraiser that we had on the show, we asked that question because it was kind of a big thing about there weren't many appraisers out, there were no apprentices, and we asked him when was the last time he had an apprentice with him. He said it's like 13 years ago.
Oh my goodness!
I'll never forget that.
Yeah.
And so it's difficult to.
Well, one of the reasons that a lot of people don't take on an apprentice, appraisers are not in, typically around here anyway, are not in large shops. They're usually one or two person
So like
organizations.
owner-operator business people.
And a lot of them operate in their home. And so because of zoning, they're not allowed to have an employee that comes and
Makes
goes.
it more difficult.
Or, it's their home, and the office is in the bedroom, and
gotcha.
people don't necessarily want to have other folks wandering in their when I'm in my pajamas. I don't want somebody wandering in my front door.
Now, when the Great Recession hit, and both Alice and I were kind of new brokers around 2007, 8-time period there, appraisers changed the whole rules. All the appraising rules changed. You went into pools of appraisers, and
we couldn't talk to you anymore.
We can't talk to you.
That's not true.
That's not
that's
true?
never
Straighten
been
us
true.
out. Tell us what it is.
Tell us what that is.
You cannot lean on me or threaten me
okay.
to hit a number.
So in other words, I shouldn't say I need to. If you call me to do an appraisal,
please don't call me and want a high appraisal.
I shouldn't say
or a low one.
or I shouldn't say to you this needs to appraise at $450,000. That's not appropriate.
No.
So, I've never done that either.
So what about, because I have some sellers that want me to point, or buyers actually, that want me to point out particular flaws on a property, and we're not even there usually except to let you in. So what is your procedure with that?
If you tell me something about the property,
right,
I'll listen.
Okay.
But if you do it in a way that you're trying to threaten me,
that's a big difference.
Threaten you with dry rot.
There's a big difference. But I don't. You know the property better than I do. You've been in it more times. I'm here for the first time. I'm willing to listen to what you have to say, but you can't threaten me with it or threaten to blackball me or any of that kind of stuff.
Oh my gosh, do people do that?
That's what.
That's terrible.
No, people would never do a thing like that.
I think that probably was happening leading up to the Great Recession.
It's just like we used to routinely get back. You probably don't remember when we used to have fax machines, but
I remember when they were invented.
Prior to emails, there was this thing called a fax machine, and you would go in and find laying in the receipt tray orders from management companies or lenders that would say, if you can hit $450,000, we'll send this right over.
Oh, I see. Sure. Okay.
And so that rule that you were talking about was designed to stop that sort of thing.
And it really has.
You're not supposed to be doing that.
And it has. I think it really has. The interesting part is that appraisers now that you're doing so many other things besides just what we think about all the time, just homes. That there's so much more to the appraising world than you realize when you think of all the different areas that you can appraise. You don't do commercial appraisal.
I do.
You do both of those.
I do.
And tell me I hear all sorts of stories. We hear all sorts of stories about there's just craziness there in the commercial world. Is that true?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, craziness, activity, busy.
Like the commercial
nothing left,
warehouse in town,
right.
the industrial, retail, industrial kind of commercial buildings, warehouses, strip malls. What else do we have?
Do you see activity in those areas?
Oh, yeah.
Business
buildings,
buildings,
where's the commercial
office
activity
buildings.
you're seeing?
Well, you mentioned warehouses. They're difficult to find any space in those at the moment. I wonder why. as we approach fall
Yeah.
and harvest season.
What do we call it? Trim and dry shops?
Yeah, something like
Well,
that.
we have 6,000. Think of this. We have almost 8,000 acres of hemp's got to be dried, and that's why you're not seeing these warehouses are being rented and leased for that purpose.
Well, and you also have, the transportation related. I mean, once you get that far, then you have another step or two in the process, and so all those kinds of things kind of fall into place.
Yeah.
Well, and speaking of hemp, when you're doing appraisals on a commercial enterprise, a commercial crop, how does the future sale of that crop affect the
That's
value? How do you do that? That
that's
just seems like magic.
That's not typically something that I worry about in terms of its crop value.
Okay.
Because I'm not an agricultural specialist in terms of crops.
So that's a different kind of
Different-
appraisal?
different type of
Interesting.
appraisal.
There's a specialty for crops for people who do vineyard appraisals, for example.
Okay.
I know what they cost in a grocery store, same
Yeah.
as you do, but
Right.
I'm not.
Okay, so we
Well,
got
that's interesting.
vineyard appraisers, and we're going to see hemp appraisers.
And there are
probably,
there are a
too,
lot of
that coming in.
specialties
Yeah.
that different appraisers have.
Okay. I
I'm-
didn't realize that.
I'm more of a generalist. I stick pretty much to real estate, but there are all kinds of appraisers. There are appraisers who do machinery and equipment in factories,
Okay, sure.
timber cruisers, and just a
Timber
variety of
appraisers.
specialties.
Yeah,
In
that
fact,
is so
we
interesting.
have a show coming up on that actually in a few
Yep.
weeks about
Somebody from BLM.
private timber lands and with their value, and I guess appraising them too, what the value is.
Interesting.
What's the value of the
appraisal
land and
timber.
what's the value of the timber, and,
Yeah.
and taken together. But so there may be more than one player.
That's
in a
so
given
interesting.
assignment.
So going back to commercial, because I know a lot of our listeners are watching businesses move in here like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So how is the business environment locally feeling to you, and how is that affecting the value of our commercial buildings?
I think in Medford as well as any of the major cities in the state, the business environment is very good. There are shortages periodically in pockets of things, but the market tends to solve that problem if over time. You might have a glut of, let's say, retail space in a mall, but that will be absorbed over time.
Yeah.
Those things tend to even out and be much less volatile than the single-family residential market.
Oh, okay.
But then again, there are fewer players, and so there's fewer influences to take into consideration.
So it's more stable. That's very interesting.
We're learning
To
a lot
growing,
here.
but
to
yeah,
listen.
it's
Yeah.
not.
I haven't had. I don't know. I've only had, gosh, in 10 years, maybe less than a handful, maybe 2 or 3 appraisals that came in on properties that I was selling that didn't meet the sale price. You've had a few of those, I know.
I
over the
have
years.
had a few of those, but it's been during this transition market, and that was one of the things
Is
we
that
wanted
right?
to talk to you about.
Go ahead.
Is appraising when the market is actively changing, like that. Just how do you do that?
Well, we're bound by most of the regulations from the lenders or the different players in the money end of it to have at least 3 closed sales in our appraisal
in your
report.
appraisal packet, yeah.
Now that in itself is a historical figure, isn't it?
3.
You said you like
You
threes.
said like the number
Well,
3.
but if it has to be a closed sale,
Closed sale.
that's a historical figure, isn't it?
Gotcha.
So that figure is going to be, to some extent, in a rising market, somewhat perhaps behind what you think
Oh.
you're marketing at. If it's in a falling market, it's going to be perhaps a
gonna
little
be ahead
ahead.
of it.
Wow. Right.
I-
Gotcha.
That's
what
true.
historical means.
If that's true, I mean that's very that's very absolutely okay.
But you're working, and this is not a put down of realtors.
No,
Please
no.
don't take it that way.
never. Yeah.
But you people are looking at improving.
We're looking right. You're
always
looking ahead. We're
You're
not-
always looking
Yeah.
forward, and
Well-
and you're very rarely going to be projecting a recession or
Right,
that kind of
that's
thing.
right.
You're
Realtors
projecting
realtors are optimists,
that,
believe me. They're
that,
very,
that, you
And
know,
so are
real
sellers.
estate is the best thing you can invest in all the wide world,
yeah,
and it's going to keep improving.
yeah,
And so and that's kind of where your listings tend to go. They
Sure.
don't usually go up. They are down. They go
yeah.
up.
Sellers want to hear that when they list a place.
And you know, I love your optimism. I'm an optimist too sometimes. I think my football team's going to win. You know,
yeah, same thing.
but I have to look at facts too, and what do the facts support? You know, we might love to see it all going up 5% a day or something, but what did things really sell for that compare to what you're trying to
That's
sell?
right. And we got a break coming up here, but do you ever, when people sometimes will say, I want to challenge that appraisal, you ever heard that? You ever heard people say that to you?
Yes, sometimes they do say that, and there is a procedure
There is.
for that.
And there actually is a procedure.
Yes.
And do people do that often? Does it happen very? I mean, one of the coolest things about it is when you hit exactly the sale price and the appraised price, right? I mean, that makes that makes me pretty happy. You?
That doesn't happen very often
I
in my
look-
world. We're either higher or
I was
lower.
going to say you have a variety of. Well, anyway, we got to break. But think about that. What you do with that? Because people, sellers or buyers, always ask that question. You know, especially if it's not what they expect it to be. That's the story there. We got a break coming up here. Pete and Alice on the Real Estate Show. Today's show presented by the Rogue Valley Association of Realtors. Danny's an instructor there, and so once a month with RVAR, you get to meet some of the great people who are instructing realtors about some of the topics that we're talking about today. And by the way, Brett Nance is our camera operator today, so we thank him for as well. We're going to take a break.
Thank
The
you,
Real
Brett.
Estate Show comes back. One more segment to go after this. Real Estate Show continues here on KCMX and on YouTube at realestateshowOregon.com. Pete Belcastro and Alice Lema with you today. Next week, we're going to talk to the sheriff will be in town.
The sheriff will be in town.
Nate Sickler and Guy Giles. We're going to talk interest rates with him. Interest rates in cannabis. It's kind of an interesting combination. But we, you know,
It works.
yeah, because
Yeah, it's going to be a great show. We're really looking forward to it.
because like every show we do, we really, you know, hope that you're learning something from it, that you're hearing something that you haven't heard before. I've heard today, Danny, I really have. I didn't realize, first of all, the extent of the different types of appraisals that people are doing, and that people are taking more pre-appraisals for their properties. That's really good to hear, much like pre-home inspections that we talk about all the time.
Yeah, it's a good trend. I'm excited to hear that.
It makes sense. Anyway, things like that. So
Good.
before the break that we were talking about when someone says, well, the appraisal is low, or I mean, generally it's low, they're going to say, can I challenge that? I've got other information. They didn't do this or didn't do that. Is that common? I mean, does it happen often, or how do you deal with that?
I don't know that I'd say it's common, although there are requests for reconciliations or
Reconciliation. Yeah. So that's
not
a tough word.
reconciliation,
Yeah.
reconsideration. I'll get it out yet.
Reconsideration.
I'm used to reconciliation because that's one of our processes. But we get those from time to time. There is a procedure. Most lenders have, or AMCs, depending on who our contact is, a process for that. Just because you don't like the number is not a sufficient reason to
You just
to ask for
Yeah.
a reconsideration. But if you genuinely believe that there may have been some sales data that was missed, or the information was lacking somehow, there is a process that you can try. But I know a friend of mine up in the Salem area that works with a AMC up there. He is responsible for receiving the request for reconsideration, and he screens them. And he's had occasions where a realtor or a property owner has submitted 27 listings. Now remember, we're talking about sales here.
Right.
Oh, so they submitted properties that were actively
But
for sale, but not sold.
27 listings from all over the market.
It doesn't do.
That was
no.
just a shotgun approach to here's sale, all kinds of sales. He screened that down to 2 that he asked someone to look at and
Well,
and
yeah,
see
sure.
if they thought that there was merit to it. And if there is merit to it, there is a way to do a revision. If there's not, there's not.
Right.
Because it's basically
If
that was saying,
if
it
I
is
feel
what it
I've
is.
done the best that I can and I've gotten the best information that's available, I'm probably not going to change my mind because you sent me 27 listings.
Exactly.
Well, and you guys are so thorough. I don't know how you do what you do every day. And I do get those phone calls from the appraisers every once in a while, and I appreciate it so much. And it'll say, we are letting you know that you'll have an opportunity. If the number is not what you like, you'll have an opportunity to send me some sales that you think are valid. And I just think that's so cooperative and so inclusive. But it's rare that the number changes because you are so thorough.
We try to be.
Yeah.
They really are.
Yeah,
I
it's very
agree with that.
impressive.
Well, we're one of the most regulated professions there is. We have state rules, we have federal rules, we have all kinds of rules from different lenders, whether they're doing Fannie Mae or FHA or VA
Oh, the loan
or
program has
whatever.
rules.
I mean, we have a stack of rules like this sometimes. It feels like that we're dealing with.
Alice, what do you do? What do you advise, again, our educating part here, what do you advise people if the appraisal comes in low? I mean, if it comes in high, then you've got equity in your place already. Everybody's happy.
Yeah, you
there.
don't say a word, you just
what-
close if it comes in
That's
high.
right.
Just keep it zipped.
But what do you advise clients when it's the other way?
Well, I always have the conversation from the beginning, before we even go on the market. Even if my belief is that the price that the seller and I are going to be putting on the property to launch it on the MLS is about where the value will come in, I still talk about what happens if it comes in high, what happens if it comes in low.
What about the
and
buyers?
prepare them. The same thing is part of the buyer education process, that this is what happens, because sometimes it's devastating to the buyer that the appraisal comes in low because the seller cannot make up the difference. Even if it's just a few $1,000s, we still have the occasional hardship case.
Can't you lower the price? And
That's what has to happen, but sometimes the sellers don't have the equity to do that, or they don't want to, and it's their chance for the seller to get out of the transaction and put it back on the market. And we've had people do that, especially in the heyday, put it back on the market and just hope for a cash buyer who does not get an appraisal.
Okay.
And sometimes that works, but it can be devastating on both sides.
Yeah.
Well, I've had people tell me, I've had realtors tell me, well, we weren't sure whether the price was right or not, so we put it in there. We knew the appraiser would give us the right number.
Well, there's a shotgun
I
approach
was
for
going to
you.
say, that's like taking throwing it up and shooting it, trying to hit something. And actually, when you do your homework, right? When you do it right, I mean, if you have,
well, that's part of
you
what
ought to be able
yeah,
to come pretty darn close to the price if you're a real estate broker, if you do your homework. You really should.
And if you're experienced in your selling properties, then you know. And if you're selling a lot of properties in an area, you could very easily have escrows in a neighborhood that you know what it's going to close at because it's already been appraised.
Yeah.
So, and we're not allowed to discuss
You're not
those
allowed to
numbers.
tell me that, though.
We're not allowed to tell anybody, but it helps us when we're dealing with the potential sellers down the road. So using a professional realtor is super important, and that's one of the reasons why.
Well, we're running out of time, and I just wanted to mention one thing that happened this week, because Alice is really looks at all the news, and I'm trying to find things that she doesn't know about, and maybe this one I got you. The condo rules have changed. You know the condo rules that you can only sell so many condos in a.
You mean the owner-occupied ratio?
The owner-occupied ratio has changed.
Is it a good change?
Yeah, everything has changed with that, and I there's a whole. It just happened like this week, like a couple of days ago. So that's going to have an effect. Oh, it's going to have an effect on appraisals of condos. It's going to have all sorts of effects.
So what
I
happened?
believe.
There will be a notice filed. I think it's tomorrow in the Federal Register, affecting, describing all of the changes that they're making.
The condo changes.
Probably one of the biggest changes in terms of, other than the number of units that could be sold. One of the biggest changes is that if it does not have to be in an approved association now. Before it had to be on one of the approved lists. They're making a provision for some exceptions for units that are acceptable otherwise, but are not on one of those approved project lists.
So that should help prices go up.
Well,
Well,
I don't know if it'll help prices go up, but it should help.
Because they'll be
s-
financeable
some-
now,
some
right?
They're gonna-
sales.
they're gonna be-
Yeah,
it's gonna be
wow,
more
because we
sa-
just
right.
had 2 of those.
It's going to be more sales.
Yep, that could not finance.
And I think in the future too, maybe developers or builders may want to maybe put more of those in because they're
Oh.
affordable because you can have more owner occupieds now than you could before. So yeah, so it sounds like a
Interesting.
positive change
Yeah.
to get more housing, which is what of course we need.
Anybody who
You
wants to
like that?
see that, it should be in the next
The Federal
February,
The
or
Federal
the
Register.
August 15th Federal Register.
Okay.
Alice,
we're
I want
writing
you, Alice,
that
I want you to
down.
write that down and go read that and report next week.
You know I will.
Out
At
of-
4 in the morning.
By
got
4 in the
your
morning, you
idea.
read that Federal Register,
You got
and
your
I
homework
want you to
now.
report back,
Yeah.
okay?
So
well,
but-
look, we're out
Do
of time.
you have
We got-
any quick words of advice for realtors or the general public, just what you wish they knew and would do?
Quick?
Quick, yes, quick.
That's quite a-
Not really, but just be calm and do your homework.
Yeah.
Don't be reaching pie in the sky and gee, I wish it would
Be,
this or I hope
be
that.
realistic. Be realistic, really.
But you know, there's data out there for you to use, especially for
Yeah.
realtors. Homeowners may not have access to,
Yeah.
to things like
All right.
MLS or whatever, but,
Mhm.
but they do.
That's
Right.
great advice.
Danny, thank you for coming by and sharing with us
Thanks
today.
for having me.
Oh, I can't wait to have you again.
we
There's
just
so much more
here
to
we
talk
go.
about.
Yeah, appraising in the whole world. It's quite an art form, and you do a great job with that. So appraisers do, overall do a great job.
I think
have no
so. Yeah,
complaints.
I
I-
appreciate
got a good
you
group
guys
of
a
They're
appraisers,
lot,
getting
yeah.
there. They're getting there on time. They're not waiting. We don't have a month to wait.
No, you're getting back fast.
All those things are really important. And the appraisers, again, they're an integral part of the whole team concept of finishing a real estate transaction. Without them, you can't do it. So we appreciate that very much and wish you well as well.
Yeah,
All right?
thank you so much.
That'll
Thanks
do
for
it for
having
the
me.
Real Estate Show. Alice, we'll see you next week as well. Thanks for Brett Nance for running our camera today on YouTube. In the meantime, have a great week, everybody. God bless you all. We'll see you next week back here on the Real Estate Show.